What is up, and welcome back to the Ministry Refuel podcast with Kat Robbins. I'm your host, Kat Robbins, and I am so excited because many of you are listening to me today, but some of you are watching me today, which that sounds kind of creepy out of context. But we now have a YouTube channel. That's right, Ministry Refuel YouTube channel. So I know there's a lot of people who enjoy listening to podcasts, but some people enjoy having a visual aspect, and I know it helps me feel more connected to the person that's talking. And so I'm so excited to connect with you guys in that way. I'm hoping it will even expand our reach to reach more leaders who just need somebody to listen to them and speak into them. And I hope that if I can be a sliver of help to somebody's ministry or leadership journey, I'm so excited about that. And I would be overjoyed to do that. So I'm glad you're here today because I think today's talk is one that every leader needs. I recently watched a video and heard this girl say this statement that I think is so true. She said, "We have normalized being stressed. We have normalized being overwhelmed and being busy." And if we're being honest with ourselves, in a lot of ways in ministry and leadership, if we're not careful, sometimes being busy can be like a medal of honor to some of us. Being busy can seem as though I'm important, and that's why I have so many things on my calendar. But in the course of trying to seem important or feel seen, what we do is we are pushing aside our own needs. We are even potentially pushing aside the needs of other people because we have normalized being busy rather than being fruitful, rather than being effective for the kingdom. And we really have to kind of do inventory and ask ourselves, am I just busy with a bunch of things on my calendar? Or am I being intentional to use the things on my calendar so that God gets glory, so that people can experience Jesus and be led well because I'm choosing to be fruitful and be intentional with what's on my calendar and not just filling it up for the sake of filling it up? Because the truth of the matter is, like, for all of us, we could easily fill up our calendars. I mean, I'm thinking about the holidays coming up and how fast the month of December fills up with different holiday parties. And then it's January and it's the new year and everybody wants to have brainstorming meetings. And then all of a sudden you have conferences to go to back up all of your new brainstorming. And all of a sudden you have, connections that you're trying to make with people, and you have events that are coming up. And before you know it, it's summertime. And then you're trying to get those vacations in. And the years go by so fast because we're so busy. The reality is time is going to go by fast whether you plan it out or not. So why not be intentional with what you've been given and say, how can I maximize the time that I've been given so that I can reach my goals, I can stay on track with my priorities and reach people? That's what it's about. And so as I think about as I think about all of the things that we can do with our time, it takes energy to say no. This is something that requires a lot out of us. Now, some of my listeners and watchers, you might be like, Kat, I have no problem saying no. And to you, I say, I'm jealous. I wish that I could be better at saying no than I am. But at the end of the day, if we want to be effective leaders, we have to get really comfortable with the word no. And sometimes, if you're a people pleaser like me, then saying no is really, really difficult. It's really hard because saying no sometimes feels like I'm letting someone down. In many ways, it's difficult to say no because we feel like we're letting someone down. Even though that may not be the case at all, it can feel that way. But we have to begin to ask ourselves as a leader, do I care more about the potential of letting someone down or the potential of being a better leader to reach more people? We have to ask ourselves that. In a lot of ways, we are like the little boy with the fish and the loaves, right? You've got all these starving people that you have to feed, and you have this little tiny amount. But what I love about that story is that Jesus took the little that the little boy had, he broke it, and he submitted it to God. And God was then able to multiply that. We have to recognize the little that we have. It starts with recognizing, I personally, this is hard for some people to say, I personally do not have enough to give all of these people. You don't. You only have so much. But what you have to do is when you bring it to Jesus, when you submit it to the Lord, He then multiplies your influence. And this is why discipleship is so important. Discipleship is so important is because you are replicating what God has done in you into someone else. Now, it doesn't have to be the exact same way. There could be gifts and styles in different people that reach the masses. So they don't have to look exactly like you. They don't have to talk exactly like you. But when you take what God has deposited in you and pour it into someone else, you recognize, I have a capacity and it's limited. But when I submit it to God, when I pour into other people what the Lord has given me, He can do so much more with it than I ever could. So it starts with recognizing I have to say no. And then we have to recognize I can only do so much. And that's painful because there are superheroes that are listening to this podcast, that are watching this podcast, and you want to do it all. But you have to come to the difficult but truthful conclusion, I can't do it all. But God can. And when I submit it to Him, something powerful happens. When I think about the word capacity, what's that first part of that word? Cap. C-A-P. Cap. Which typically a cap is the sign of like, you can't go any further than this. We've reached the cap. We've reached the top. And you as a leader, you have a cap. You might be able to do a lot. You might be able to balance 3 projects on your head at once. You might be able to go on 8 coffee dates at once. You may be able to raise a certain amount of money for your nonprofit all in one swoop. And that's amazing. But you have an end. And you have a limit. And the problem is that most of us don't want to recognize that we have a limit. So we're always trying to push the limit, keep pushing, keep going. And we wonder why we feel tired and burned out. We have to recognize that we all have a cap, and that's no cap. If you don't know what that means, just ask your local Gen Z and they'll remind you what no cap means, okay? And so what I want you to understand is we all have limits, and it's difficult to admit, it's difficult to say, but God has intentionally given us those limits as a reminder of the fact that we need Him. We need Him. Do you know 1 Corinthians 10:23 talks about how everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial? I love this scripture because it applies to a bunch of different areas of life, but it especially applies to this. You can try to do everything as a leader, but it's not beneficial to you. It's not beneficial to your family. It's not beneficial to the people that you lead. If you try to say yes to everything, you might be able to do it, but you're going to be cranky. You're going to be angry. You are not going to be the best version of yourself for the people that you lead and the people you surround yourself with, because you are beyond your capacity. You are beyond stretched. I think about those commercials from back in the day. I think it's a Snickers commercial where the commercial starts out and it's like Danny DeVito and he's angry and he's got his arms crossed and he's all frustrated. And then they give him a Snickers and all of a sudden it's this young, like jock looking guy, you know? And the point of the commercial is you're not you when you're hungry. But in the same way, you're not you when you're stretched. You're not you when you're pushing beyond your capacity. Because at the end of the day, the Lord wants you to hand that over as a leader. And that takes humility. That's what we have to do. And so we have to recognize that just because you might have time in your calendar, you might have the ability or a slot open to do a particular thing, we don't ask ourselves enough, do I have the energy to do this as well? Do I have the mental stability, the mental capacity to give to this? You have to ask yourself that. Now, there are times in ministry and life where sometimes we just have to dig our heels into the sand and say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm spent, I'm exhausted, but I'm going to do this anyway. But that cannot be our norm. Our norm has to be, you know what? I've been working on this project. I've gone on this retreat. I've planned this event. Thursday night needs to be open. Thursday night, I don't need to go to dinner with somebody. Friday morning, I need to spend some time with Jesus. And you know what? Maybe next week I need to take a vacation. I need to get away with my spouse for a couple of days or take my kids out for a couple of days. Once we start to realize that, we become better leaders. We begin to fill ourselves back up so that we can continue to pour out. But if we continue to look at our calendar as, oh, I can do that. Oh, I have a slot here. I can fill this up. Your calendar, I guarantee you, is already very full. And yes, there are things that you have to do, but we have to begin to look at our calendar and say, how can I plan out my week so that whoever I touch, whoever I impact are getting the very best version of me? And one of the ways that I do this is I recognize the power of somebody who drains me versus somebody who pours back life into me. If you have 3 coffee dates in a week of somebody who drains you or an event that drains you, you don't need to add another one of those events onto your calendar for that week because you're going to be spent by the end of the week. But if you find yourself, hey, I've had 1 or 2 occasions or coffee dates or dinners or what have you that brought life to me. Maybe you do have some mental capacity. Maybe you do have some mental energy to give into somebody who might take more out of you. And I'm getting really practical with you here today because I know the truth of the matter is, as leaders, we want to say yes to everything. We want to do all of the things. We want to be Superman. We want to be Superwoman. But can I tell you something? You have a God who does that for you. You have a God who is waiting for you to just say, it's yours. I can't do it anymore. I can't feed the masses, Jesus. I might try. I might dig in the ground and find some potatoes and chop it up and give it up to people. I might go in the street and ask people to donate towards this cause, but I'm going to be exhausted at the end of the day. You know, that's no good to anyone. What we have to do is recognize that Jesus is a person of multiplication, that he can do anything, but we have to give it to him first. We have to surrender it to him first in order for him to do that. And so my encouragement to you, if you're a leader who's listening, if you're a leader who needs to see increase, how we see increase is by giving it to Jesus, by taking it out of our own hands, by recognizing our capacity, our cap, our boundary, our hard line in the sand. When we recognize that and we give it to Jesus, he's able to do so much more with it than we ever could. And so if you're listening today and you're like, Kat, I'm spent, I'm burnt out, this is a message for you. We have got to slow down. We have got to say no. Sometimes, and I've heard this statement before, and you probably have too, no is a complete sentence. No is a complete sentence. You don't have to offer a bunch of explanations. And hear me, there are sometimes you just have to say yes. And I get that. But again, this cannot be our norm. This cannot be the thing that we regularly do, or else we will be running on empty all the time. In conclusion, I just recently helped plan a retreat. I had a lot of leadership over this retreat, and I spent months pouring into this retreat. I spent months planning activities and purchasing things and praying and fasting, and I loved it. I loved preparing for this, and I believed that God was going to do something really powerful for our students. But as I did that, and the time got closer, I kept pushing myself. I kept saying yes to things. I kept doing things beyond my capacity. And what happened? I got to the retreat, and the time came for me to be able to pour into the students that I had been praying and fasting for. And guess what happened? I got sick. I got tired, and I wasn't able to be the leader that they needed me to be in that moment. So I got to do all the preparation. I got to do all of the things that needed to happen before the time. But when the time came for the priority, the most important thing, I missed it because I overspent myself. Thankfully, the Lord allowed me to just take a day or two and rest, and I was able to give my all the rest of the retreat. But I tell you that because that wasn't my first rodeo with something like that. That was something that I had walked through previously, and I'm sure you have too. As leaders, it's our job to give ourselves over to people. It's our job to love people well and serve people well. But it is also our job to care for ourselves well also. It is our job to look at our calendars, to look at where our minds, our hearts, our spirits are at, And if they are not in alignment with where they need to be, then we need to be quick to say, if I can't give my best, if I can't be there 100%, then I need to back off. Then I need to say no to some things. Then I need to step back and spend some time with the Lord. If there's something that's off, Lord, correct it in me. Change it in me so that I can be the best leader that I can possibly be to the people that I lead. I want to say thank you so much for listening today. I hope this blesses you. I hope this encourages you. And I hope you know that you are not alone in this. If you are struggling with this today, this is something that a lot of us struggle with. But this is an opportunity to just make a little bit of a course correction, to get back on the road so that we can keep driving forward. We can keep leading our organizations forward and trust that God is bringing the increase as we give it to Him. As always, this is the Ministry Refuel podcast. I'm your host, Kat Robbins, and thank you for listening.